Hi guys, this is Mike Hibbert back with another Python Django tutorial for you. This time around we're going to look at a system called South, which allows you to be able to manage your database schema and the data inside of your databases more simply. I know that in previous tutorials we've looked at using exporting to JSON and then re-importing the information, and some of you found that that was ideal, and some of you found it was a bit clunky and no good. So that's not necessarily the way that most people do things. Most people use a migration tracking system like South, which makes things far more simple and more reliable for when you try to deploy your code on a website. So with that, we're going to take a look at this and see how we might have implemented our article models and how we might have updated our database had we been using South in the past. And obviously we didn't do that in the past because that would have made things a bit more complicated than we needed them to be. So now's the time to start and introduce this, now that we've gotten used to the other more basic ideas. So to get South onto the system, we basically do pip install South, and that should download it and import and install it into your virtual environment ready for use. The next step we need to do is we need to make sure that our settings.py is aware of the module that we're using. So if we edit the installed apps section of our settings.py and add in the South module, so parenthesis South with a comma on the end, from then on our manage.py script will then be able to know about the extra functionality that South gives to the Django framework. So what else do we get? Well, before I show you what else we get, I'm going to show you a little way of shortening the command line stuff so that we can have everything a bit more simple. And the way that is we make our manage.py file an executable. So we do that by saying chmod +x manage.py, and from then all we need to do is just call manage.py with a ./ in front of it. If we run that on its own with no commands, we see now we also get an extra section covering the South command line options. And we're going to cover 3 of these options in the use of our system. So the first one we'll cover is the schema migration. Then we're going to look at migrate, and this is basically the command that you'll use to actually implement the migrations that you've built up using schema migration. And then lastly we're going to look at data migration, which basically is a way of us changing the data within our database to match the new structure in our schema. So for instance, if you had a name field, which is something that we're going to show as an example, perhaps you don't want to store it as one string in the database, perhaps you want a first name and a second name. So what we do is we basically use the data migration to perform a task in between the changes in the schema and update the data accordingly. And that should help us to safely migrate our database across from an older version to the newer schema without losing data, and with it putting the data in the correct areas that we want it to. So we'll take a look at that anyway. So the first thing, like I say, is the schema migration. So the first thing we want to do is that we've created a new model, and in this case it's not a new model, it's our old article model that we're going to use. And we're just going to basically get it to do a first time look through the whole of our model and see what needs doing, and this will be called our initial migration. So the command we use for that is our manage.py schema migration, the name of the model, or the name of the app rather, which is article, and just say -- initial. So this is our initial first time look at what's inside there that we're going to build up a migration history for. So we do that, and hopefully, if I've got everything set up correctly, just quickly double check, we should see something like this. Right, yeah, so that's worked nicely. Added model articles and created 0001 initial, which basically will be the name of the first migration for this. And then it tells us you can now apply this migration with manage.py migrate article. We're not going to do that just yet, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you that if we add in some new stuff, i.e. our comment model that we created in the previous tutorial, and we run that command again, but in this time we use the command auto, meaning auto detect any changes in the models and update our schema and our migration appropriately. If we do that, it should now look there and say, okay, I can now see this comment model in there, so I'll add that in. And notice it's updated the name to 0002. Now this is your migration version number, and this is quite useful in later commands when you actually start to perhaps want to roll back what you've just changed. So say you've made a migration and it didn't work, or it did something that you didn't need it to do, you can actually roll back using these version numbers. Now how do we keep track of what these files are? In our article app folder, we should now see a new folder called migrations, and inside there we can see the individual .py files. So you can always see what migrations are available inside of here. If we take a quick look inside of one of these things, you'll see it creates a class in Python. So there's some good news. Whatever you're seeing here will only be in Python, so you won't be particularly puzzled by it if you already know the Python language, which I hope you do if you're trying to do a Django tutorial. Or else, why did you come here? Anyway, so we've got a migration class, and it has two methods, and this is usually the case in every migration. There will always be two methods. There's the one called forwards, and there's the one called backwards, and they pretty much do what it says on the tin. Forwards is the way of migrating forwards to the new schema or the new data, depending on whether it's a data or a schema migration. In this case it's a schema migration. We can tell that by what this inherits from. So it's basically saying create this table inside the database, and here's a definition of all the different parts of the table, the different fields, and what they should be. In the backwards section we should see just a delete table, because obviously there's no data in this system as of yet. It's just literally created an article model and created the table inside the database for it. So if you rolled back from this particular whole migration, then you would effectively just be deleting the table from the database. So with that, what's in the next one? The second migration that we created, in its forwards section, we've got create table for the comment. In the backwards, we've got delete the table. So that's what a migration looks like. So then we've created an article model and we've created a comment model. How do we actually apply the migration to the database? How do we actually get it to create the tables? Well, we do as it says here. You can apply this migration with migrate article. So let's just do that and see what happens. Okay, so running migrations for article, moving toward or migrating towards 0002. So it runs the first migration, installs what the article model table itself, then runs the second migration, and that's all completed nicely. So that's done. So what happens now is that we've now created the schema in the database, and if we were to open up the database, let's have a quick look. We can see that the tables are now created. Now notice also that there's a South migration history table, and this is where South tracks which migrations have been run and where you are in the whole scheme of things. And inside of there we'd probably see a little bit of version history. So let's just have a quick look. Select, unfortunately my SQLite man doesn't let me do any quick kind of drop down table things. You have to do everything by SQL, or as far as I know you do. So migration history, let's run that. Did I spell that wrong? Migration. No, it didn't. I just forgot to say from. There you go. So there you see, it's stored the migration histories of what we've put in there. Okay, so South tracks what we've done so far. It implements what we said in the migrations should happen, and we've created those tables with the columns, etc. So what happens if we want to change our model? Because obviously in our previous tutorials we added in a thumbnail field. Well, all we need to do is we need to go back and we need to run the schema migration article --auto command. That doesn't sound very easy or simple, but it is. If you just try and keep it in your console's history of commands, you can probably run that a few times. So let's run that again. Now, thumbnail does not have a default specified, so thumbnail is not a doesn't actually have any text to go in it. And obviously, with it being a text field, it should have something in there. So it's saying choose an option, quit now and add a default to the field in your models.py file, which we could do. We could go here and say the default is such and such in this here, or specify a one-off value to use for existing columns now. Well, I'm going to cheat and I'm just going to go option 2, and I think I'll just put a / in there. Okay, so then it said added the field and then created the 0003.py, and if we have a look in there, just to quickly notice what this actually does, the version 3 does this. In the forwards it just adds a column, in the backwards it deletes the column. So we've had migrations that create and delete tables. We've had migrations now that add and delete columns, and if this was an update of a column, then we'd have to go into a bit more detail, but that would just be a case of making sure that the schema would change. You probably should be warned that if you try to do that with MySQL, it probably wouldn't like it. But if you're going to do migrations properly, you should probably use a proper database that you would find more in the wild, like MySQL or like Postgres or something like that. You wouldn't necessarily use a SQL-like database on a proper website anyway. So perhaps it's worth investigating how to actually connect through to alternative databases. Or maybe if anybody asks, I might actually do a tutorial myself. Okay, so we've made that change. Now let's just apply the change. Okay, so that's applied that. So maybe we've made a mistake. Maybe we shouldn't have applied that thumbnail field. How do we get rid of it? The way that we do that is we go migrate article, and this time we choose the number of the migration we want to go back to. So I'm going to say go back to migration number 2, which is the one where we just added the comment but there was no thumbnail. So let's just do that. And what do we get? Migrating backwards to just after or 2. So we should just have our comments in there and no thumbnail. But say I changed my mind again and I wanted to just go ahead and do it anyway and go back to version 3. We can simply move forward again. So it's not difficult to go back and forward. If I decided that version 3 was completely rubbish and I didn't want to use it and I wanted to re-establish it, all I would do is I would go into here into the migrations folder and just physically delete these 2 files here. Okay, so that's how to update your database using the South system. But what about in the case of our existing system? The database that we created has already got information in there. So I'm going to come out with this virtual environment and go into the virtual environment for the previous tutorial, which has all of the stuff in, the existing stuff in. So I'm going to deactivate here. That drops us out of there. Then I'm going to go into our old one. Okay, so let's activate this particular one, and I'm going to show you a slightly different way of doing that. Instead of typing source bin activate, there's a shortcut. You can go dot, oh, not source, dot bin activate, and that does exactly the same thing. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but it does, and it's, if you prefer not to type as much, then go ahead and use that. So in our existing project, we have a database that basically has all of our schema already built in, and all we're trying to do is convert this through to using South and having some sort of version history in there, because if we make any changes in the future, we want at least to have something there that we can roll back and forward to if we make changes. So the simplest way to do this is to basically use our initial schema migration for article. I don't think I've made this manage.py executable yet, so I'm just going to quickly do that, and that makes life way simpler for me. Schema migration. You now know why I normally have everything typed in automatically for us, because I'm not a particularly good typist, although it doesn't necessarily impact on me being a programmer. Way yeah, or a speller. Right, so there you go. From the first initial, it noticed that I've already got my article in there. I've already got my comment. If I use my browser, I think I should be able to find the files inside of article. and if we just edit that, we can see simply all it's done is it's created a forwards method and added 2 create table methods in there, and for the backwards method it's just blogged or bulked together the delete of the table and the comment together. We can see it's also recognized that we've already created a thumbnail field, so it's quite happy about that. What we would do is, in this case, when we come to do our migrate, we wouldn't necessarily want it to go and try and create that schema inside the database, because it's already there and it may contain data. So what we can do is we go fake on the end, and that will update the database fields for South and make sure that it knows about the version history, but it won't actually attempt to do anything with the tables. Okay, so that would then make sure that we're up to date. Now if we made any changes from now on with the database, it would basically roll back all the way to this one specific migration file. So unfortunately you can't necessarily keep track of older migrations you've done if you've got an existing app, but at least you can install migration tracking from now on, which means that at least from now on you've got a bit more of a chance of being able to manage things sensibly. Okay, so if we go to our other model, in our previous tutorial we've got models, here we are. I'll get rid of that other one from our little test. We've got this model here. Now in our comment we've got the name. Say we don't want to use the name anymore. Say we want to have a first name and a second name. Now to migrate from using that name, which may already contain data in the database, to the new name format, we need to do 3 different stages. Now some of you might think, why don't I just stick the first name and second name columns in there and have done with it, and then the name one will get deleted. Well, that's fine, but also the data inside your name field in your database will get deleted also. So there are 3 stages that we need to follow. Firstly, we need to include the new fields, so that there's a schema migration created for that will just create the fields. Then we need a data migration, which will then process whatever's inside the name field into the first and second name fields. And then finally we need a schema migration to get rid of the old name field and leave the first and second name fields there. And then all 3 of those steps will be recorded in the process. So let's just have a quick look at our run through of what that does. So we've got our name field there. We're not going to remove it just straight away. We're going to add 2 new fields. This one's going to be our first name. This one's going to be our second name. We're going to save that. Now we're going to create a migration for that by doing our schema migration article auto. And this is where I get into trouble for not using my proper editor. Right, okay, let's just fire up Wing, which takes care of tabs and indentation very nicely, and give myself a slap in the wrist for being so stupid as to not use it. Here we are, and here we are. Wing knows exactly what I meant. There you go. Let's just forget about using that. Get rid of it. and use the proper software for the tool and for the right job. There we go. So that's done. Try it again. And again it just says, right, first name does not have a default value specified. So what are we going to call it? We'll just say in this specific time I'm going to specify a one-off value, and it's just going to be nothing, an empty string. And the same for our second name. I'm going to specify a one-off value for that. Okay, right, so then our migration has been created for that, and that's been named O0002. The next stage is to create a data migration. Now we don't need the auto command on there, because this is just simply going to create a bog standard migration file with no commands in it. Oh, oops. Convert, we need to make a name for it, so convert names. So if we look in here now, yeah, we should now see this one, and if we just look inside, what it's actually done is created a migration based on the data migration class. The forwards has had nothing put into it, the backwards has nothing put into it. So what we've really got to do here is we've got to use one of the arguments from the forwards method to actually access the models inside of the database. And what we would do here is we probably would just get, using the ORM module, would go something along the lines of ORM article objects dot all. Actually, we'd probably do this in the for loop, actually. Never mind. So for a in, we would do a, actually it's not even an article, is it? It's a comment. Dot first name comma comment dot second name equals comment dot name dot split, whoops, using a space. And in fact, let's just wrap this in a try, because it might not succeed. If it doesn't succeed because there's no space inside of there, then we want to do something similar. We want to drop this in. The first name goes into, or the name goes into the first name, and then this empty string goes into the second name. And if we go into the backwards section, whoops, we then go, in the case of this comment, the name should equal nothing, because unfortunately there's no way we can keep track of what information we destroyed in the conversion process. So unfortunately it isn't perfect, but if you've got lots and lots of data that you've got stuck in a database and you know that your migration has been tested offline on your test servers, when you come to do this on your live servers, then you won't be so scared of what it's going to do. You will have at least tested it, and hopefully you won't be at the point where you have to go use the backwards method and then blank all your names off. So that would be a lesson learned in testing, obviously. So then you've got your third section that would do. So you roll through all your names in the comments, split them off into the separate fields, and you do one final thing, which I forgot, is you would do your save. Right, so that's exactly how you would use it inside of Django, and ultimately this is more or less the models that you've been creating in Django. The only thing that we've used is this ORM object to access them, and that's basically an instance of the Django model system that's been passed in through our migration class. Okay, so finally, once we'd done that, we then create another migration to finally get rid of the name. So we basically go into our model and now get rid of the model field out of our comment class. Then we do another schema migration auto, and there we are, having more ridiculous behavior from my non-indentation friendly editor. Where's my models file? No, that's not what I'm looking at. It's the migrations, isn't it? Here we are, migrations. So let's get that to sort all that out. There we go. It's not right either. So there we go. I hope that's corrected it. Let's go back and try again. Yes. Okay, so the field name does not have a spell. It's saying that we can either quit now and go and alter our models.py, or we can specify a one-off value to use, or we can disable the backwards migration by raising an exception. I think I will choose option 2 and just set it as a blank field. So there, it's created our fourth migration, which is to just basically rip out that field, that old name field that we don't use anymore. So what would happen is, if we were to apply this, but I'm not going to, because I haven't got time. If we're going to apply that, what would happen is it would go to revision 3 and run that, which would add the two field first name and second name columns, but keep the name column. Then it would go to revision, did I say revision 3? It would go to the first revision, which would add the two name fields. Then it would proceed to the next revision, which would be the data migration, and it would run our code to update those fields and split off what's inside of the name field and put them into the first and second name fields. And then finally it would go to revision 4, and then it would remove the name field from the database. So that's how you would do a gradual incremental change in your database that involved using existing data. Okay, So that's pretty complex stuff, and I think that's possibly reaching outside of the realms of beginner's tutorials, so I hope I haven't burdened you with too much information. If you have any comments or questions, please put them down below in the box below. I hope this has been instructional and educational for you, and if it has, then please click the like button. And if you'd like to know more about the tutorials that I'll have in this series and get a notification every time I put one out, which is usually on a Friday, then please click the subscribe button. Thanks for watching.